Did you know that scientists estimate that there are between 5.3 million to 1 trillion species on Earth? The reason the margin is so vast is that a significant amount of these species live in areas that are mostly inaccessible to humans, like the deep sea, or are microorganisms that can't be seen with the naked eye. So I ask you, with that kind of uncertainty with even the number of animals on our planet, is it any surprise we have so many beliefs about what happens after death? Death is one of the great mysteries. It's something every sentient being has to undergo at some point in its existence. It's been said that more people have died on Earth than are currently alive today. We all understand that death will invariably claim us at some point. Despite that, nobody can say for certain what happens after death. The only people who would are, well, dead. We need to also grapple with the fact that in terms of how long humans live, your life is ultimately a blip on the radar. This is why so many religions have their own interpretation of what happens after death. Some believe we ascend to a higher plane, while others believe in reincarnation, and of course those who believe death is the absolute end. Like a candle burning its wick until there's nothing left, once you're dead, that's it. So, when you finally die, if someone were evaluating your life, you have to ask yourself, did I lead a good life? Did I bring joy into people's lives? Or did I just bring misery? Would people mourn my passing? Have I earned my place in paradise? Do I deserve a second go-around? And, most importantly, would they agree with you? Now, before this gets going, this is your polite warning. I've never done this before because up until this point I haven't had to. But this particular topic is about a series that openly discusses death, which unfortunately means you're going to be hearing and seeing depictions of death, which in this context will also be going hand in hand with mentions of depression, murder, and suicide. If you're not cool with that for any reason whatsoever, that's your business and no one has the right to take that away from you. So if you're going forward, remember.
It was your choice. You get to live with it.
With that said, let's say you wake up riding an elevator. You have no memory of how you got there, and when the elevator finally stops and you exit, you see that someone else exited the one right next to you. Maybe the person is your spouse, maybe it's someone you once knew, or maybe they're a complete stranger. In front of you is a hallway. Since there's no other direction to go, you both walk further in. At the end of the hallway is a bar. The bartender welcomes you and lays out some ground rules for what's about to happen.
1. I'm afraid I cannot provide you with any information regarding your current location. Number 2. Now that you are here, we shall have you play a game. Number 3. As to game selection, that will be decided upon by roulette. Number 4. The stakes of the game are very high, your lives in fact. Number 5. Don't worry, this is the final point. Until the game is completed, you cannot leave.
Claiming that both of you have to play a game, the outcome of which will decide whether you live or die. But of course, the true game isn't based on if you win, but if you've been judged worthy. So begins another night at the Quindecum in the anime series known as... In 2013, an animated short film named Death Billiards was released. It consisted of two men playing a game of billiards to decide their ultimate fates. People latched onto the concept, and in 2015, Studio Madhouse, who also produced the anime adaptation of Death Note, premiered the show now rebranded as Death Parade. And if I may be so bold, based on the intro being your only information going into the series... you better buckle up for a mood whiplash. Strangely enough, the series is actually better regarded in America than it is in Japan. I would hazard a guess as to why that is it's entirely possible that since death is viewed a lot more negatively there, one of their cultural religions, Shintoism, views death as one of the ultimate forms of impurity. Us being a bit more nonchalant of death made it more accepted, I suppose. Slightly unrelated, I had a buddy who at one point watched the first episode and was miffed the show wasn't scarier. In hindsight, I know a lot of people with some really dark senses of humor. So, as an episodic series, the show mostly operates on each episode functioning as a standalone vignette, with a revolving door cast of visitor duos. The only real constants being the bartender/arbiter of the game's decum and his assistant. So I hope you liked the characters the first time.
You're never gonna see it again.
Now you need to understand what's happening here, and I don't mean in a pretentious, oh, you have to be so smart to understand what's going on and only I can tell you. I mean, you, as the audience, need to be made aware of what's going on here. Otherwise, you'll end up more lost than a dyslexic in a misspelled street sign store. To do that requires an explanation of the machinations occurring behind the scenes in the Quindecum. And I'm not just talking about Decum's chosen way of getting people to play the game.
What?
The people that come to Quindecum are already dead. The reason, at least based on Quinn Deckham's normal procedures on why they're together, is that they died at roughly the same time. In most cases, because they died for the same reason, like, say, a car crash, though in others, it's a coincidence. It's Deckham's job as an arbiter to figure out where they have to go, either being reincarnated, because you're a good person who deserves a second go-around, or sent to the void due to their actions in life and during the game, marking them as needing to be taken out of the equation for all eternity. To condense the idea to its most basic form, Deckham's performing a misdirection on them. He tells them they're playing for their lives, so they'll be more inclined to do things they wouldn't do normally, acting more out of self-preservation. As it's claimed, arbiters need to do this to bring out the darkness of their visitors' souls and render judgment upon them. You're probably wondering why I felt the need to explain that to begin with, because the show also felt the need to explain. The first episode, now officially as Death Parade, has Deckham testing a couple, whereas the second episode has Deckham's boss Nona explaining to his new assistant all the little manipulations happening during the game. Later, she also learns one of Deckham's other responsibilities as an arbiter is to directly throw a monkey wrench into the game if it's going too smoothly. Like, for example, as the show goes on, Deckham's assistant learns more and more about being an arbiter. Like how the whole bar thing isn't just an aesthetic choice. Arbiters are actually trained bartenders, which includes having to actually procure supplies for the bar. I haven't the foggiest idea why they don't just have these things appear magically, but I guess in for an aesthetic, penny in for a pound. On that note, the bar thing actually makes sense. People do tend to need a stiff drink after getting news this bad. Also, seeing as most of these games are things you'd play at a bar, except for maybe the arcade cabinets, that's more of a Dave & Buster's thing, which is a whole different kind of survival game. Though, more to the point, by now you might be wondering why no one remembers being dead. It does seem like one of those things you'd have a hard time forgetting about. But according to the show, you would be wrong. In the show's universe, the shock of death is so traumatizing it actually makes them forget, which actually leads fantastically into another arbiter responsibility. In his capacity as an arbiter, Deckham is given his visitors' memories, and any memories that are related to them. Would you like to see what that looks like? Creepy as hell, right? Anyway, the assistant also learned that Deckham, like other arbiters, has a hobby. Though in his case, it's dressing up old mannequins like past visitors, who he happened to like as a sort of tribute to them. Arbiters actually have to have their memories of past guests expunged to make room for more. This presenting the side effect of Deckham not actually remembering the guests who he made figures of. In exchange for this insight, she helps Deckham give more nuanced judgments, often outright questioning why Deckham is purposely making things harder. And along the way, they brush paths with not only Nona, but the antithesis of Deckham's arbiter style, Ginty. You see, Deckham, despite coming across as rather indifferent and speaking in a monotone voice, at his core he's actually a calm, calculated gentleman who respects humans who lived good lives, and rarely interferes unless necessary. Whereas Ginty is an emotional, loud, petty, brash jerk-ass who at the best of times sees humans as irritating organ sacks.
If you think you're gonna beat me, you're crazy!
Stop it!
Even showing how on their first day on the job, out of the two of them, Ginty was the only one using the remote. When we see him acting as an arbiter, he doesn't even bother to pay attention to them, and trust me, you really don't want him to pay attention to you.
This is the beginning of the actual game. Hope you two kids have a lovely time.
I'm fairly certain the only reason why people even talk to Ginty is because of his cat. But even that doesn't get him very far, with Deckham appearing to be his only actual friend. That's only because of that old hat where you're close to a coworker because you started around the same time. Now, within some episodes, a theme can emerge between the duos. My favorite example, and the one I can most cleanly explain, being the arcade fight between a reality TV star and a shut-in. Both of their lives have something to do with family regrets. The reality star went through a ringer of a life to get where she is now, despite it all raising a healthy group of kids, though coming across as using her kids for profit, only to get cut down by her manager due to inflicting so much grief onto her. The shut-in, on the other hand, killed himself due to depression and after his death, regretted not recognizing his stepmother as loving him.
I've got a secret wish. You want to guess what it is?
I really don't think I could.
Well, someday. I'd love it if Yosuke felt close enough to me to call me his mom.
Why couldn't I just give her that? She was always so good to me.
It's supper time! Home cooked attack!
This actually brings us to the crux of one of the things that the show is trying to suggest. Death isn't just something that only happens to you. Death affects everyone around you. People will mourn you. People will regret what they may have done to you. They may even do something unthinkable. There's unfortunately also such a thing as an ignoble death. Sadly, the world is filled with chance and anarchy, so you don't always die in a dignified manner. Take Mayu here. Like most of the people who died on the show, she suffered an accident, but unlike the others, she died in a less than glorious manner. The flip side of that, of course, being that there are also people who accept death as an eventuality and have made peace that their time is limited.
It may be over now, but at least I know that I lived a full life.
That is a wonderful thing to hear.
Death Parade seems to be going with the interpretation that in spite of that chaos, life is still worth living. Ergo, if you lived your life like a good person, you deserve a second chance. And due to the nature of the games, you're rewarded for thinking selflessly. Decim doesn't even necessarily have to pick which person goes where. He's actually capable of sending both people to reincarnation. He's even willing to let his guests hang out before they leave if they're nice enough. The first couple of episodes are fairly on brand with this formula. That is until Decim receives a Ginty-sized pop quiz. From that point forward, there isn't as much of an emphasis on paying attention to the Quindecim. You understand that that's what's going on is still happening, but we start focusing on the other floors. For example, the next episode actually being the one that shows how Ginty conducts business. In addition to the show starting to ask if there's something else going on here. Mostly because Nona seems awfully interested in the assistant. While following Nona, we even meet her friends Quinn and Castra. Quinn works for the memory department. They're the ones who send arbiters the memories while deciding which ones they get. Quinn also being the previous bartender of the Quindecim. Castra seems to be in charge of the routing department. She's the one who's been sending visitors to the Quindecim and Ginty's var Viginti, which are actually Latin for the numbers 15 and 20, which are also the floors each bar is on. There's also Clavis. He has green hair, he works the elevator to get from floor to floor. That's it. The next time the show chooses to return to showing Judgment for a whole episode, it's at the worst possible time. But before we get to that, let's talk about the actual plot that's been carrying over from episode to episode, continuing throughout the whole series. The through line of the series is how the Arbiter's judgments could be flawed. The main suspect on why that is has to do with what the Arbiters are exactly. We learn that the Arbiters in all the visitors' bodies are actually the kind of mannequin bodies Decim uses. The visitors' souls inhabit them until they're done. The Arbiters, not so much. The Arbiters look like humans, but they're effectively just dolls wearing human skin. Or, in other words, they don't actually have human emotions. This is why Decim tends to come across as so cold. He literally doesn't have emotions, giving them their detached view of humanity. That goes double for Gintu, who again outright views humans with contempt, not even really giving any real thought to where he sends people, and that's not even getting into his view of death.
Humans think dying's something that happens to someone else. So, at the moment of death, they start desperately looking for meaning. But there is no meaning to living. The fact of the matter is, they live in order to die.
It's even implied that Ginty sent one of the people he judged to the void for completely petty reasons. In any normal job, that's a textbook grounds for dismissal. But in Ginty, or for that matter any Arbiter's case, that doesn't carry any real punishment. You see, since all Arbiters are cut from exactly the same cloth, they all have to abide by the rules that govern their existence.
Number 1. Arbiters cannot stop making judgments, for this task is more than their job, it's the entire reason for their existence.
Number 2. Arbiters cannot experience death, for that would taint their judgments. It would make them too close to being human.
Number 3. Arbiters can't feel emotions, for it's not in their natures.
It's impossible for a dummy to have feelings, after all.
Giving Ginty the boot would actually go against the first rule, in much the same way as the rules of each game are the only actual enforced rules, leaving room for possible sabotage, which is why the Arbiters never interfere with cheating. If it's not a rule, they turn the other cheek. So too are the Arbiters' rules. They only have to abide by those 3 policies. They're allowed to do whatever they want as long as it doesn't conflict with the rule. You may have also noticed by this logic that there's no penalty for getting a wrong judgment, even if the Arbiter thinks they thought it through. Want to know what I mean? In the process of judging a couple, Decim actually made a poor choice and sent them the wrong places. Decim, as an Arbiter, couldn't understand the real reason the wife lied to her husband. She got sent to the void instead of who probably should have actually got sent there.
That wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was more than that. Takashi was a person who couldn't trust anybody. I don't see how he could ever have found happiness.
Them getting sent to the wrong places isn't even the worst part. The worst part is that when it's discussed, it's treated like a minor faux pas, implying that arbiters make mistakes enough times for it to be treated like an inconvenience that has to be ironed out instead of a massive flaw in their system. Though, more to the point, the arbiters being so emotionless and only getting a select amount of memories makes them able to judge people from an objective standpoint. The problem with that, as the show points out, is that people lead very complicated lives, and it's possible that someone could do something heinous without really meaning to. Or, worse yet, because of factors they couldn't have possibly predicted impacting someone's life negatively. That uncertainty about judgments even feeds into how you, as a member of the audience, would feel about the visitors. You may very well either sympathize with some of their personal hang-ups or lambast them for their poor choices. The show wisely decides to let you mentally make your own decision about if the guests deserved what they got. That human element of doubt is very well one of the reasons why someone who thinks like a human may not actually be the right choice. But the way arbiters conduct judgments from a detached place of neutrality may very well not be a good idea either. How could someone possibly think they can judge others if they can't understand what it's like coping with all the ways life can screw you over? And since arbiters can't die, they'll never experience life. Compounding the issue is that the arbiters are actually having to deal with a rather unique problem. They're experiencing a rather sizable uptick in deaths from the mortal world. At many points, it's stated they're currently dealing with 7,000 deaths an hour in the mortal world, leading to an increased workflow for everyone.
People are dying too fast. Way too fast. The rate is 7,000 an hour now. Did you know that? Which works out to 116 a minute, or roughly 2 per second. Okay, you're dead. Okay, you're dead. That's what it's like. At that pace, it's impossible to do our best work.
And I have quite the hunch who's responsible for this. Are you guys familiar with that show, The Good Place? I think it actually hits on a similar beat in a way, namely the main issue of how they decide where people end up. The good place or the bad place. A standard bullet point mark for any kind of heaven or hell model religions have. The problem there has to do with the fact that their system is based on a tally ranking, where they don't just record your actions but also the ripple effects. Like, say, buying a tomato inadvertently supports costly ozone depleting out-of-season importing. All these little choices that you probably had no idea you just made tally up to make it impossible to actually get to the good place.
Humans think that they're making one choice, but they're actually making dozens of choices they don't even know they're making.
It's even shown that the system can actually get caught in logic paradoxes. You could be one of the biggest pieces of human trash to ever walk the earth, but because you happen to scribble down an idea for a charity that someone else implemented after you died, you've by proxy created something that made life better for everyone, forcing the system to recognize you as a good person. And the only way it can reconcile with that enigma is to stick you in a purgatorial middle place until they can make a decision. So, like the good place, something has to change, or who else knows what could happen. This is why Nona gave Deckham his assistant to help give more nuance to the judgments. Now, you may ask why she can do that. Well, thanks to Ginty, we know why.
That's the guest you were unable to pass judgment on, right?
Yes, Deckham's assistant is a dead human. For some reason, she showed up in Quindeckham alone, remembering she's dead, which is immediately a red flag that something is very, very wrong. After needing to have her memories erased, Nona, taking advantage of the situation, has her sent back to work with Deckham until such time as she can be judged adequately. Unaware she's dead, which during her stay at the Quindeckham, she remembers. Unfortunately, this particular revelation coincides with the next judgment. See, Nona, taking the next step in her plan, and to test Deckham and his new assistant, has them placed in a special circumstance. She bribed Castra to pull some strings and have a special duo sent to the Quindeckham, instead of an arbiter who handles special cases. Problem is, there was an actual reason why they needed a special arbiter.
Ma'am, it appears we have a guest arriving in the bar shortly who has killed someone.
So, with no other options, they proceed with a game of air hockey. Things start off fairly normal for the series. Both men, Shimada and Tatsumi, seem to be getting along fine. Though, there is this one little niggling thing. Shimada starts mentioning that he needs to take care of somebody afterwards, and I don't mean a nice night on the town. I mean a nice night with a plastic barrel of hydrochloric acid. Even stranger, Tatsumi seems to be fairly gung-ho about his plans. You know, seeing as how he's a police detective. Though regardless, the game is still going forward. That is until the assistant makes a rather odd request. She wants
I'll
to
put in
see
a
their
request
memories
about-
for herself, actually giving her the opportunity to learn about how often disorganized the memories usually are, and why they can't just go on only that alone. From that point, things only get worse. See, evidently, the two of them weren't exactly exhibiting a winner-takes-all approach, so after running out of time, Deckham has no choice but to instigate Phase 2 of the game, having the pucks actually dole out physical pain. Now, in the midst of an actual life-and-death struggle, it all comes out.
They're both killers.
Yes, it seems so.
Turns out after Shimada's sister was assaulted, he was out for the guy's head, and probably his other organs. He actually found the little puke and killed him, but mistaking Tatsumi for an accomplice, he killed him too. Which is, of course, the standard deadly misunderstanding, except for the fact of why he was there to begin with. Turns out, in addition to being a police detective, he fancied himself a deadly vigilante, who insisted on watching his targets commit a crime before killing them. Meaning, he actually watched Shimada's sister get assaulted, and did nothing. So, suffice to say, when he's presented with the opportunity to make things square, concluding with the both of them getting sent to the void. If that wasn't bad enough, Deckham ends up getting chewed out by his assistant for acting so callously during the game and intentionally setting up Shimada to fail. Though, to be fair,
The world's a cruel, screwed-up place, and we have to accept it. You can't change that. Nobody can.
Guy was talking a big game for someone wired to a ceiling. And being fair to Deckham, it's said multiple times in the series, Deckham is only doing his job of trying to bring out the darkness inside visitors to determine if they deserve reincarnation, which he's only doing the way he knows how. Remember, when all you have is a hammer, all your problems start looking like nails. But regardless, in the aftermath, Deckham goes to Nona to report on what he believes is the core of how the Arbiters are screwing up.
I have come to believe that the way in which we arrive at our judgments is fundamentally flawed. The method that we employ, using extreme conditions in order to reveal the darkness within the soul. What if we are creating that darkness rather than just uncovering it?
Which, granted, is not an unfair assessment of the problem. People do tend to not think clearly when they believe their lives are in danger. But, on the other hand, there is such a thing as exposing what already existed. Fact is, some people spend their whole lives keeping these feelings inside, only letting it out when they think they can get away with it. Hence, internet comments. This is clearly quite the conundrum. Further thought is required. If you'll pardon me a moment.
I'll be in the Chamber of Understanding.
Any further thought on this, though, is sadly going to have to wait. Something has come up. Now, earlier I mentioned that his assistant is a guest at Quindeckham, meaning she's still a human, and here's the rub. Since she's still technically a visitor to the Quindeckham, she still has to be judged. Now, Deckham did get an extension on her stay when she first showed up, but even with that, her time is starting to run out. Deckham has to figure out where she needs to go, but even remembering some things, her memories are still wiped, so she still can't remember large chunks of her life, much less her own name. Their only hope at this point resting on the thing that ultimately kickstarted her memories. Throughout Death Parade, a lot of the ways that Deckham interacts with his assistant relates to one of the show's more unusual reoccurring motifs. The story of Chavo.
Jimmy peered outside to look at the snow, and do you know what he saw? There was a girl about his age playing on the ice with a cute little puppy. Jimmy didn't need to talk to the girl first. He knew right away that he would like her. Her big smile promised instant friendship.
You see, Chavo is a children's story of a little boy, Jimmy, who tries to befriend a little girl, Chavo. The problem is that Chavo is deaf, so the story is about trying to communicate your emotions to someone you can't interact with by the means you're used to.
We don't always realize it, but there are so many other ways of expressing our emotions besides using words.
A smile?
Yes. A smile is universal wherever you're from.
Which, if you're not a very good guesser, mirrors Deckham trying to understand her despite not having the same kind of emotions she does. Chief among them, Deckham never smiles. The story is apparently an adaptation of a Russian legend about a man named Death trying to understand a woman named Life. Because Death and Life are from two different realms, she can't hear him. only becoming able to when he chooses to spare the life of a child trapped in a pit, with Death vowing to only take the boy when his time comes. The story ending with Life and Death having a child called Hope, because no matter in life or death, hope can arise. The story not just being a pretty good parallel to Deckham and his assistant's dynamic. For whatever reason, she had been having dreams about it. Following that, after meeting someone who is actually familiar with the book, who, coincidentally, was the wife of the old man from Death Billiards, she actually remembers her name.
Her smile really is terrific, isn't it? You're right. That's my favorite part too, Chi.
I'm pretty sure my name is Chiyuki.
Now that Chiyuki can remember the details of her own life, they have to confront a very uncomfortable truth. Why is she dead? So, as a child, Chiyuki's mother would read her Chavo. This is why she had a dream about it. The book started her interest in ice skating, which later became a decision to pursue figure skating professionally. But due to a career-ending knee injury, she fell into a severe depression, outright doubting that she's a good person. And I don't think I have to tell you what happens next.
I took my own life.
So, now with all the pertinent information, all Deckham has to do is decide where she needs to go. Thing is, at the same time, Nona is finally facing some blowback for her actions. All throughout the series, Nona has been trying to prove her point that arbiters need to change. Despite this not technically being an issue, she's been having to act covertly. And as the series unfolds, we get to meet the reason why.
Aha, finally awake, are we? Good morning. You know you're adorable even while you're sleeping. I'm afraid poor Quinn over there can't say the same thing.
This is Oculus, and he is Nona's boss. Yes, this pink-haired old bum is in charge of this entire system. Doesn't seem that scary, right? Well, his favorite pastime is using the solar system as balls in a game of pool. But here's the actual problem with him. Oculus isn't just Nona's boss. In the Celestial org chart, he's directly under God. And unfortunately, despite looking like he lives off a retirement home in Miami, befitting someone in his position, he's a bit of a stickler for the rules, on top of being a nihilist when it comes to the changes to the system Nona's come up with. And he has the power to exert his will to ascertain what she's doing. And after the murder fiasco, guess who finally noticed that Nona was flaunting his authority?
I hope you enjoyed yourself. Looked like fun.
Sorry?
You've been bad, Nona.
Now, I don't want you getting the wrong idea. Oculus seems to be working more under the premise that trying to change the system is a terrible idea that can only end in sorrow. In his opinion, any attempt to try and make the Arbiters more human is a pointless idea that will never yield fruit. His argument boiling down mostly that all Nona is doing is making things harder than they need to be. Arbiters can't be made to experience life. To do so would make them unfit to judge. Too human. It's why they have removed memories of previous guests from the Arbiters. So I ask you, what's the use of experiencing a human life when you'll never be able to experience the other half of life? Death. Though, he doesn't really get upset until he learns about the other part of Nona's idea. As the show went on, you thought that being the naive newcomer, Chiyuki was the focus of attention, and since Deckham is already an arbiter and comes across as so unfeeling, his character arc seems not as important. Ergo, she's the only one where attention matters. Turns out that Chiyuki was the linchpin, not the goal. Nona's plan wasn't to see if a human could make a better arbiter. Her plan was to see if you could make a better arbiter that's more capable of understanding humans, leading to better judgments by giving them human emotions. And as you've no doubt guessed by now, she meant Deckham. When Deckham was created, he was implanted with human emotions. All she needed was someone or something to jumpstart them. Enter Chiyuki. It's never explicitly spelled out, but it's entirely possible that Nona set up the initial issue with Chiyuki remembering her death by sweet-talking Quinn to have Chiyuki still remember her death, and Castra sending her down to the Quindecum alone without anyone else, facilitating a scenario where Deckham has to take his time judging her while letting her be his assistant, while her inner human gives her the nerve to challenge his preconceptions about how things ought to be. The good news is, Oculus is beholden to the rules too, and attempting to stop Deckham from judging Chiyuki would technically be a violation of the first rule. So, willing to see how this all ends first, he won't be doing anything to stop the wheels that are already in motion. Yet. So, returning back to the real main event, Decim, after drugging Chiyuki's cocktail, which I can't stress enough that you should never, ever, ever do in real life, takes Chiyuki back home as a passive observer and gives her a choice. He'll bring her back to life. The catch being that in exchange for her being brought back, someone has to die in her place. All she has to do is press one little button, and in all likelihood, she won't even know them. There are a lot of people on Earth. Surely one person dying is worth her life back, right? There's just one problem.
I can't press it.
I don't understand.
It isn't right. Everybody matters to somebody.
Like I said before, death doesn't just happen to you. In much the same way your loved ones will mourn you, you'll mourn them too. When you care even a little about somebody, they matter to you, and you hate the idea of something happening to them. It's one of the ways we often make death personal. It's something that everyone has to undergo, and of course more people have died than are currently alive today, but just because we all know that doesn't make it hurt any less. All the people Decim and Chiyuki judged had loved ones who probably still miss them, and would probably give anything to see them again.
Even if they aren't important to me, there's someone out there they are important to. Someone who cherishes them. Somebody like my mom.
Chiyuki realized that taking her own life was selfish, making her responsible for her mother mourning her. She can't do it. Taking someone away from people that love them would just be even more selfish. So she starts demanding Decim push it for her. If she can't do it, Decim has to. But unfortunately, Decim can't keep this charade up anymore.
I am terribly sorry.
For the first time in the series, we see Decim actually express an emotion, and it's sadness, during which he loses the crosses in his eyes, the thing that all arbiters in the series have, one of their most distinguishing features separating them from humans. This being the first time he interacts with Chiyuki as a person, not as an arbiter.
It's okay.
I'm so sorry.
You don't have to apologize.
But after what I did...
It's okay, I understand.
I think this moment isn't just that Decim is regretting having to judge Chiyuki, it's because he knows that he can't keep her here any longer, and he's going to miss her. And with that settled, Decim sends her off with the one thing he never had before. While at the same time, at the top floor, Nona and Oculus were watching the whole thing. But Oculus's mind hasn't been changed, especially seeing as Nona's plan boiled down to make arbiters suffer so they'll give more accurate judgments.
Judging humans is difficult, true, but that doesn't make it right to assign any random judgment to them. There needs to be a change. That was the point of what I did.
You know what's funny? I just now realized that Death Parade ends up being a pretty good representation of the Death card in the tarot deck. The Death card is actually one of the most misunderstood cards in the entire deck, mostly because people take it at face value and think the word death is the only thing it's saying. As any person who's actually familiar with the card, or just plays any given Persona game, the Death card usually means the end of a phase in your life. Like I've been saying since the start of this, death is something that everyone goes through, making death the ultimate example of how often scary entering a new phase in your existence is. In a more general sense, tarot cards actually mean different things based on which direction it's facing. When the picture is upright, or facing you, it typically means you have to let go of the past and start over, usually also meaning that there's been a sudden and unexpected change, which you may very well be having some difficulty dealing with, because you often feel like you're caught up in a path of sweeping changes that you can't escape from. When the card is reversed, it means you're on the verge of change, but you're actually resisting it. You might be reluctant to do it, or you might not have the courage to do it, or you just plain don't know what you have to do. And because of that, you feel like you're stuck in limbo. But just because we have to accept entering a new phase of our lives doesn't mean we won't still have some hang-ups about it. Which, if I'm not mistaken, pretty well encapsulates the conflict of Nona believing that no matter how hard it is, a judgment of whether someone gets to live again or fall into a pit of non-existence where you spend an eternity wallowing in all your worst emotions is something that should be accompanied by pain.
A judgment ought to be accompanied by suffering. Or what's its purpose?
Its purpose?
To suffer, yet stand firm. That's what it is to live. It's what gives life meaning.
And Oculus's unwillingness to change is well-meaning, though ultimately not a good idea. But regardless of all that pain and suffering that Nona ensued when Chiyuki entered Decim's life, The Arbiters return back to their normal state of business. Nona doesn't even really get punished. She's even admitted that she has zero plans to stop trying, save for two things. Oculus trying to nip some of what Nona did in the bud instigates a fourth rule. An Arbiter may not work hand in hand with life. To do so would ruin them.
It is an unacceptable collaboration.
And one other thing. Deckham has made some changes to his approach. And in the end, even a little bit of change is better than nothing. Look, death is difficult and sad, and no one ever really likes dealing with it. And that's okay. Just don't let it make you into a person who doesn't care about others. So, if you'd like to see all the other crazy stuff I didn't even bring up, shocking I know, I would recommend that you watch